Hi, I'm Susan Carew. I am a World Peace Clown or Fool. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow, and this is an introduction to my work as a submission, a video submission, as a potential pathway to peace. Sometimes we have to get a little bit silly, a little bit crazy, yes, in order to step out of our comfort zone. We get stuck on tracks, and then we see the world in a certain way. And it's very hard for us to envisage stepping out into new ways of seeing and envisaging a new future. I was inspired in this work. I actually dreamed I was teaching peace. I came out of an economics type market research background. And prior to that, I worked in hundreds of companies. But when I dreamed I was teaching peace, this came as a real surprise. And when that happened, everything fell away out of my life. Partnerships fell away, jobs fell away. Whole new life opened up, and it was all based on uncertainty. What we do unconsciously is we try to create surety and security and certainty in order to order our world, to control our life, because we fear what we don't understand. The fool is an archetype. It's a very ancient archetype. And I was inspired to become a fool. It isn't something I'd ever thought of prior to this stepping out into something completely new in my life. Imagine coming from a professional career into a performance-based educationalist future where I was crafting new ways to see the world. Now, this presentation is based on my book, A Fool for Peace. Rotary did fund the editing of the book. I have created a PDF of it. I've also created an ebook of it, and I've also broken it up into smaller ebooks to create a focus on elements of peacemaking. This pathway that I've created, I believe, will bring real hopes to the world. When something isn't working, we have to open up the mind in order to see anew. It was Einstein that actually said, to solve a problem, you must create a new consciousness in order to see anew. No problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created the problem. So some people might get a little uncomfortable when new ideas come in different packaging, when people might seem a little bit out there. But perhaps being out there is what is needed in order to shake us awake. Because on the current trajectory, we will have a sixth extinction event. Therefore, we need to be foolish enough to explore alternatives that work. It's not about being right. It's not about being the smartest. It's about being in tune with balance, which is the real peace. The clown or the fool, of which I am proud to say I am one, is the acknowledgement of the humour within, the silliness within, when we all can relax and we start to fool around. And I know Rotarians do this. I've witnessed it many times. And that's when they kind of just go into fellowship with each other. And there's lots of laughter, there's jokes, as they really are seeking to do good in the world. They bring in a business paradigm, and that can get challenged. That should be challenged because a lot of the discord in the world is coming from the very economic system that we have created. I am trained in economics and I'm a market analyst. I'm also a clown. And I've had enormous joy being a clown. It's probably been the highlight of my life. In fact, my understanding of peace awakened when I stopped thinking and started to feel the world around me, when I stepped out of my comfort zone, off the cliff of what was sure for me, and I went into the unknown on my own. I stepped out alone, and that's when I realized the fool's gold. And you may ask yourself, what is the fool's gold? What's that? Well, it's the gold that people think is foolish. I actually call it real hopes. And I see it as the nuggets of gold within us. It is gold that people may not think has value because you can't see it outside of yourself. It's not in material things. It's in the virtues of humanity that each and every one of us are born with. This is the real wealth of nations. This is the true gold of the highest value. And once you understand real hopes and integrate real hopes into your life, you will recalibrate yourself into what would be seen as balance or equilibrium or homeostasis if we look at the planet itself. Because inner peace is without doubt a mirror of outer peace. If we're not at peace within ourselves, there's no way we can create sustainability on the earth. There's no way. Because what's happening within inside the human condition, we then project it outside of ourselves, believing what has been thought or felt inside. We then see it in the outside world. That's why if you ever hold a focus group and you might say, what's peace? You'll find every single member of that group has a different vision of it because they're coming from what has been their own experience, their own values, and it will really demonstrate how they see the world. So you might ask yourself, what is real hopes? Real hopes is responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment, and service. So responsibility is the ability to respond. Empathy is to stand in someone's shoes and feel their feelings. Awareness is to simply notice, is to become still and become aware, to seek for a truth within that awareness. Love is to share, care, reveal, and heal. Honesty means you can tell the truth at all times. People might say, no, you can't. Yes, you can. It's about reframing what is true in a way that doesn't offend other people. It's sensitive to those others, but it is your truth nonetheless. Sometimes we may clash because it may well be said in innocence and someone else might receive it differently because this is shaking the foundations of what they believe is true. And rather than them look into the gold within themselves, they might project out something negative towards another who's threatening what they believe is true. Nonetheless, when we stand in our own truth and we gently express it to the world, it is up to the world how it chooses to receive it. But the delivery of the message, of course, is very important. So responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness. Oneness is that we're all one. We're one family. We breathe the one air. We are all connected as a species. How is it that we know someone's going to ring us and they ring us? We're connected. We are one. And when we start to see ourselves as one, there is no enemy anymore. There is no other. There is no judgment. Because what I see in another is a reflection of myself. Always what I think of them is my projection. And always what they think of me is their projection. It's a little bit like the movie screen of the mind is the projector, and you're looking at a screen. And that's the film that you're playing from the mind's eye, but it's your projection. That's why a whole range of people could look at the same film and interpret it differently, because always we're coming out of our own projections. But once we become aware of that and conscious to it, this is how self-responsibility comes in. So responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace is the yin and the yang. Peace means balance. It's not about not feeling any discord. It's not about not being angry. It's not about suppressing our emotions and appearing to be at peace when we're not, or making the peace in order to stop the tension. No, peace is the yin and the yang of it. It means you have mastered the negative and the positive within yourself. You're not suppressing it, you're mastering it, you're recognizing it, you notice it. Sometimes we get angry, but you don't project it onto someone. Sometimes, we get jealous, but you might pull that in and say, I love myself. I don't need to compare myself and be negative towards someone who really has great talent. There's no need to be jealous of that. I'm beautiful and perfect as I am, which is true. The yin and the yang is the dark and the light, the negative and the positive. It is the opposites. And of course, the jester has the opposites in respect of the diamonds that we wear in our suits. And those diamonds are about the rebalancing of those opposites. It's not about rejecting one and accepting the other. It's about coexisting with those opposites in a state of peace. So the jester is uniting the opposites, is what jesters do. The jester was known in the court of the king to be the joke teller, to get them laughing. This de-escalated the violence. The jesters were the early conflict resolvers. They were probably the first. They saw the humour in the conflict and they played up to it. That's why comedians can allow people to have a good laugh at life when it gets overwhelming for everybody. So responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment. Again, the clown. This is the archetype that gives you permission to laugh at your inconsequentialities. Where you make mistakes, you laugh about it. You trip over, it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get it right. You can laugh. You can see the joke in life. When you can rise above the drama, it's still a beautiful world. We still play. Crazy things happen in moments of levity. We forget ourselves. We forget our training and we become human. And that's what the jester is all about, is the experiential nature of being a fool. This work is to awaken that fool to the true happiness of the clown. So enjoyment, service is the last one of the fool's gold. This is the lovely nugget that brings together all the values which are of greatest value to humanity. When you integrate responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment, you will naturally serve the world. Do you do good? We are being goodness, joyfulness, virtue, compassion, love. It comes naturally. It's not in the doing, it's in the being that we discover real hopes for humanity. The being is authenticity. You're not trying to be good. You're not attempting to show compassion. You're not seeking to show to the world how great and how good you are. You simply are being good, and it comes naturally. You just know to give when it's needed. You know when not to give. It may not be needed because you know they need empowerment. You don't want to take their power. You want to empower them to find their true power. And always it's in their own discovery of those gold nuggets, which is real hopes. When we pass real hopes from one to another, it's like lighting a candle and passing it to the next person to give them real hopes. And we pass it to the next person and the next. We no longer fight against anything because we recognize there's dynamics in the world. We may speak the truth about something that we feel may harm another because we take responsibility. We have the ability to respond. But we will never hate the other because empathy will make me stand in another's shoes to feel their feelings. Now, let's say they're not feeling anything. Let's say that they are detached and they're causing great harm. I can stand in their shoes and I can understand when I don't feel. I'm not going to be aware of the harm that I do. I may look upon that in a detached state of mind, unable to feel. So the challenge then becomes, how do we assist that other to become aware of the harm and that what they put out returns to themselves? It is a universal law. What you put out comes back. That's why the wars never end, because it continuously is recycling. We haven't learned the lesson. We haven't learned that all war, whether it's inner war or outer war, comes from the belief in powerlessness. In reality, we all have power. When you love yourself, you will feel the power of that self-love, as you then can look at the world without any need for love. You will be the change you wish to see in the world, which Gandhi so wisely taught. Love, as they say, is the answer without a doubt. Unconditional love means I'm not the bringer of all knowledge to you. Unconditional love is to know that you already know. You may not be aware at this point, but you already know. Everyone is a master. Everyone is a fool in waiting. So there's no holier than thou in this work. We are all on journeys of self-discovery, of which the fool's journey, which is the hero's journey, reflects to the world. We are all heroes. We are all fools because the fool and the hero are really one and the same. Because the hero has to step out of his or her comfort zone in order to discover his or her courage, in order to discover new information about the world. You have to go out and experience it. Otherwise, you will not know. It'll be theoretical. And the fool's journey is not theoretical, it's experiential. So that gives you a little bit of a feel for why the fool is so important. And to awaken the fool is really to awaken the virtues of humanity. So in my book, A Fool for Peace, I talk about experimentation as I went on my own journey to awakening the fool within me. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I learned on my journey. I firstly started out as a clown, and I was inspired by Patricia Cameron Hill and Shane Yates. This was a nurse and a doctor team. And I literally went to this seminar because a friend of mine who was a doctor was with me at the time when I received the message that this talk was going to happen. Now, when they talked, they revealed the clown, and I became inspired by that. I became inspired So much so that I decided to go out and buy clown clothes in a $2 shop, and I invited one of my friends to come with me. And the two of us started clown rounds, which we started at Canberra Hospital. This happened around 2000, the year 2000. And we literally made up the clown as we played. We had Wally the Jolly Trolley. We played with the patients, with the doctors. We brought levity into that space. And of course, Patch Adams is well known for being the inventor of laughter is the best medicine. And he was a clown doctor whom I had the privilege of traveling to Russia with 40 clowns. And we brought that same medicine into orphanages and nursing homes, HIV places, on the streets of both Moscow and St. Petersburg. This was a peace-building strategy by Patch Adams to thaw the Cold War relationship between Russia and the United States. So from my clowning in a hospital, creating clown rounds, I got to go to Russia with Patch. And I knew I was going. I just knew when his brother rang me from Washington and invited me. I didn't have the money at the time, but the money came. So clowning for me was the real education of peace. Because when you clown on the streets, you can't say, I love you and not you. You love everybody because your intention is for love of everybody. And it's an amazing experience when you look into the eyes of others smiling and they smile back. It's very healing. It actually stimulates the endorphins. It has a health impact on patients. So even on the streets, there's a health impact when people feel safe, when they feel that there are people creating fun, when they're not being judged, because that's really where ill health comes from, or dis-ease. Patch Adams talks about loneliness as the greatest illness in the world. The greatest dis-ease is loneliness, isolation, homelessness, rejection, judgment. All these things create that. So from there, I ended up studying peace studies at La Trobe University here in Melbourne. I met Dr. Tom Weber, who was the most amazing man. And he was the one who inspired me about the principles of nonviolence through Gandhi's work. He himself was a Gandhian scholar, probably one of the foremost in the world. And we studied South Asia, the India-Pakistan tension. The #1 nuclear flashpoint in the world was there. I studied international relations. I studied strategic work, politics of nonviolence, politics of states, nations, and securities. I had to look into how states operate. I looked at some of the 17th century philosophers and how they saw the world. But for me, Gandhi was the highlight. I had felt inspiration around Gandhi. He was amazing. I even clowned at La Trobe University just to test out the clown on the academic staff. And I danced with students. They smiled, some of them as they were walking past. It was a great day, and it was that day that I realised I was a World Peace Clown. That was truly a remarkable experience, and that was what actually catalysed my letter writing to Patch Adams. And to think all of this came from a dream I had in 1998 that I was teaching peace. It's truly been a remarkable journey. Even to that point, it was incredibly exciting and exhilarating. So that was my traversing into the academic arena to see peace from that angle. I even did a toilet paper poll at the university where I put up notices in the ladies' and men's toilets saying, "This is the place you come for peace, what do you think?" And I got them to graffiti write on pieces of paper. I got all sorts of interesting comments. It was great. So that was just a bit of innovation. I also did a survey on a forum, in respect of a forum on terrorism. I had all the audience people fill out a survey. I produced a report and gave it to some professors there, just to assist in helping them connect with the public. So another exciting phase of my life happened at La Trobe, in actual fact, which was my discovery of poetry. I had the gift of poetry when I was quite young, because I used to go out and write on the back of coasters, poems. I have poems for when I was 15. I've always been a poet, but the real poetry blossomed in me when I attended La Trobe. So I wrote many, many poems, and I used to put them up on the notice boards. As I started to find that not only was I being stimulated academically, I was being stimulated poetically, which is philosophically. Because the poem is like a rhythm, it's like a song line. You start to go into your deeper truth and you express that truth through poetry. And poetry takes you into a completely different space to an academic paper. Because with an academic paper, we're thinking through, we're researching. With poetry, it just flows. It flows from a source that, in my view, is unnameable. It sings in a way that brings that balance into the full picture of what it is you're expressing. And it could be politics. It could be war. It could be peace. It could be happiness. It could be love. It just rebalances and rebalances as that rhythm, as that song seeks for the truth. The truth in truth, if I can put it that way, it's not a concept. Truth is actually love in expression. And it feels right. You know when you speak the truth, when you get suddenly a flash of inspiration, you go, I get it. That's truth. You just know. It sits with you. You just know it. It's not something to remember. Truth, when it's known, can never be unknown when it's real. And always it brings you back into harmony with who you truly are. The real truth works along those lines. So I wrote many, many poems. I actually wrote about 1,500 poems over that period. It was absolutely a dynamic and creative time in my life. I've mentioned Patch Adams a few times. I went to Russia not long after that, and it completely transformed me as I got to love the world. I went into orphanages and nursing homes, got to have fun and laugh for 2 weeks. It was only 2 weeks, but what Patch was trying to do was bring together a group of people like a tribe to practice unconditional love. This is the real training in peace. You have to work on the inner self, which is to start to learn to love others and yourself before you can even get to solving world problems. Around that time, I also started to get inspired metaphysically, and I started to read more esoteric books. I was just led. Nobody led me to these books. I just found them, and I had that knowingness when I read them that it was true. They were spiritual, but not religious type texts. And what they inspired within me is a deeper aspect of love. I was taught values that were universal. Real hopes came out of this inspiration that I felt. So I wrote the Real Hope, Peace, Nonviolence and Anti-Bullying program for schools. And I dressed as a clown, a world peace clown, and I went into the classroom, grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. The clown was the perfect character to connect with children because children are natural clowns in actual fact. Children connect easily with the clown, and the classroom becomes a place of play. But it's also a place of curiosity. It's a brainstorming session. It's juggling. It's jokes. It's exploring, what are these values? What do they mean? Responsibility, the ability to respond. It's in your hands. What does that mean? You can do something. Empathy, standing in someone's shoes. Are we standing in big clown shoes and walking around? How is it that we feel someone else's feelings? How do we walk? How do we talk? The children get to learn conflict resolution. They get to learn Jane Elliott's Blue-Eyed series, but in a clown format, which is about anti-discrimination. They get divided on the basis of eye colour. Half the class becomes part of the group with the clown if they've got blue eyes. If they've got brown or green eyes, they have to sit to the side and watch us doing Chinese whispers, which they don't like. And then we debrief. How did you feel being the inside group? How did you feel being the outside group? What does it feel like? So when we're in the playground, how do we make sure no one feels excluded? How do we include everybody? So the children get to learn discrimination. I teach them how to tell the truth all the time. They don't need to do a little white lie, but we can speak the truth in gentle ways. We can speak the truth about ourselves, to ourselves. We can speak the truth about ourselves to others. We can speak to others about truth. Groups can speak to each other truthfully, because once we're transparent, there's no game playing there. People can solve problems much more easily when truth becomes the modus operandi. So this experiential peace, nonviolence and anti-bullying program went for 8 weeks. So I'd come into the school. I'd visit 4 or 5 classes, teaching one value each week. And then the children had to fill out their clown books. They had to experience that value at home with their friends. So it was a very deep program. They learned to question everything. They saw how they treat people differently on the basis of whether they're a friend, whether they're a stranger, or whether they're a person that they think is an enemy. How do we treat them? Why do we treat them differently on the basis of how we judge? Can we love? What is love? What happens if you don't have love? And I told them about the baby houses in Russia, where the children can go crazy if they're not given love before the age of 5. So this program was extremely powerful, and I felt a bond with the children as an equal, because my teaching was about equality. The clown was a character, not a teacher that had power over them. Everyone's voice was respected in this type of forum. The children looked forward to it because it was fun, it was different, they were learning things. So this program could change the world if it was implemented in every school throughout the world, if we had real hope schools. We could have any sort of character. For me, it was the fool. Because for me, the fool is the quizzical character, is the fun character that steps out of the comfort zone, that says it's okay to make mistakes. That's your friend, that loves everybody, willing to have fun. The fool is a very powerful character for children. I also created a World Peace Day where I would set up a peace day either at a school or it could be at a library, and children would go through real hopes but in a more sort of truncated form. And I had much more activities so that children could experience that connectedness, could experience juggling, which is rebalancing the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. Juggling is actually excellent for developing concentration, for learning to follow directions, understanding the patterns of life, because we're all engaging in patterns. And that's why it's hard to change, because we don't know how to change the pattern. But until you become aware that you're in a pattern, which is becoming conscious out of unconsciousness, until you understand there are things you're not seeing, that we're very selective in our attention, we can drop our balls. But it's okay to make the mistake. That's how you learn. And then you can make up different ways of juggling. You can be creative. You have fun. It's a fantastic way of learning to be at peace with mistakes, but constantly growing as you're learning more and more and more. And that is the true education. So from the school work that I did, I created a children's circle parliament, which was a non-adversarial parliament, the first of its type, I think, in the world. And I will outline for you a little bit about the Children's Circle Parliament. It was really to help children learn collaboration skills. It was to develop decision-making and leadership within children. It was to critically ask questions about some of the most pressing issues. It was to empower children that when they work together, they can solve these problems. It was a parliament of voices, but there was no leader. The clown or jester was the icon of the parliament, sort of seemingly at the head of the parliament, but not really. Really just a symbol that we can have fun with learning how to solve problems. And so I came up with curriculum for the children so they could go through an actual fixed program in the classroom itself and learn how to develop skills like lateral thinking. So I'll just read out for you some of the programs that I created in that Children's Circle Parliament. Democracy R Us was the first week, which is all about learning what democracy is, and it is about sharing. It's about sharing power. Week 2 was about valuing each other. So this was really looking at real hopes, the values of humanity, and really seeing the true value in every person, not based on what they do, but who they are. Working and playing together, learning how to cooperate, learning how to consult others in the group, not dominating the group, but really valuing contributions from the group. And in fact, the group process is more important than any particular person shining in that group, because the purpose of the group is learning how to work together. The following week was all about solving problems as friends. So we don't go into adversarial conflict with one another. We actually solve problems as friends. So it could be going through a process of conflict resolution. It might be inquiry, personal inquiry. Is it true? Can we be absolutely sure that it's true? How do we reduce this big problem into smaller chunks so that we can work on it? What is the problem? Do we understand it? Another session was based on happiness and creative tools like De Bono thinking. De Bono's creative thinking, the 6 thinking hats. Children can learn how to parallel think, or wearing the same hat at the same time. They might be working out the facts of something. They might be thinking creatively about something. They might be critical of something. You know, they might be looking at solutions all at the same time. So that group process is that you're not arguing against each other, but you're actually coming up with the same process in order to address that issue. And of course, happiness is lightening up about things. We don't get into heated debates, but we we can appreciate that's the way it is for them. They see it that way. I might see it this way. And how does the clashing up of those two different ideas, which is not us, how does that create another idea that comes out of that? And so the children would go through a practical process for a few weeks, and then they'd come together in a big parliament. They'd all come together with their ideas and really fuse an outcome, a possibility, a strategy on how to tackle some of these big issues. So everyone can do it. It's just a question of learning how to focus on conflict, how to focus on problems, and how to solve it. So my fool's journey then took me into the media after I did the schoolwork, and I became a producer and a presenter of Bridges for Peace. Now, this was a Northwest community radio station where I wrote, produced, and presented 135 radio programs. I interviewed lots and lots of people, and the purpose of this was for me to learn about peace from the perspective of other people who were either experts in the area, they could have been activists, they could have been people coming up with creative ideas, maybe they were conflict resolvers, they could be soldiers, politicians, and so forth. So some of the people, just to give you an idea, I interviewed Bob Brown, who was the Australian Greens senator, interviewed him about his book, his bibliography and his life. I also had the great opportunity to interview Philip Adams, who was with Radio National. He's probably one of the most voluminous radio presenters himself in the world. He has Late Night Live as his program, and he's interviewed the most preeminent people all over the planet. He's an intellectual, he's an experienced broadcaster, and he was kind enough to give me some time to talk about what peace meant to him. I also interviewed Mark Latham, who was the opposition leader at the time in the Labor Party. He's since gone off in another direction now, quite different to where he was before. And I interviewed John Dean, who was the former White House counsel for Nixon. He was interesting. He had produced a book, Worse Than Watergate, and he was talking about the Bush administration. I had the privilege to meet Scott Ritter, who was a senior weapons inspector in Iraq. He spoke at a lecture at the University of Melbourne about illegal US wars. He and I got the opportunity to speak. I wasn't able to interview him as I left my mini disc at the restaurant, but he and I did spend at least 3 hours talking about real hope, in actual fact. And at the end of our conversation, he said, I'm going to have to rewrite my book. He had written a book called Waging Peace, and he was bringing military strategy into the peace area, whereas what I was telling him was it really is about universal values. It's about there is no enemy other than the thoughts that go around in our minds that create the enemy based on unquestioned thinking or the fog of war, which Robert McNamara, the former US Defence Minister, spoke about. War, in truth, is a fog because we have to maintain a line in order to keep that adversarial conflict. In truth, it's the projection of power. It's coming from powerlessness and the fear of that. It's also very much integrated into the economics of industrial expansion, where the militaries now are being utilised to project power that way. I also had the privilege of meeting Major Douglas Roque. He was another US Army expert and an official in respect of depleted uranium. He had been the former head of the depleted uranium project in the Pentagon, and he had come out to Australia to talk about the problems of depleted uranium and the health impacts. He was, in effect, a whistleblower, as was Scott Ritter. I also interviewed the former foreign minister here in Australia called Gareth Evans, who had coined the doctrine A Responsibility to Protect, RP2. R2P. So he was articulating a narrative of we all have to take responsibility and we must protect the vulnerable in the world. It was a very compassionate statement that he made. He also was head of the International Crisis Group, taking on approaches to try and de-escalate conflict around the world. Very articulate speaker. When I was studying economics, he came to our university. This was Griffith University in Brisbane, and spoke, and he was probably one of the most polished and well-presented speakers I'd ever heard. So when he gave me some of his time after a lecture on the United Nations, he gave me time to talk about peace, and we did explore my children's parliament, what he thought of that. I also, on that same occasion, by pure accident, met a man who had met Gandhi, and his name was Dr. Kanwar Singh. And he had, as a young man, actually sat with Gandhi. He and I got talking, and when I realised that he had actually met him, I interviewed him. Now, when I asked him about the experience about Gandhi, his eyes started to mist up as he felt this inspiration around him. He said he had a power that he could not identify. He said he was very powerful. He also dreamed about Gandhi's assassination a week prior to his death, which is quite remarkable. He also worked for the United Nations. He was a very, very much an accomplished man himself. In my book, he talks a lot about what he has done in his career. Another amazing doctor was Dr. Linda Hogan from Dublin University, who talked about nonviolence and why nonviolence is important, because still the narrative of nonviolence is not given the precedence it needs to have if we are to de-escalate this violent mindset that's being imbued through the media, through entertainment, through violent video games, through creating role models that are violent, and anchoring this into the masculine identity. She talked about the problem being the socialization of males into this warrior type, violent archetype. So there does need to be a reframing of what it is to be a man, and to bring out role models that are non-violent, like Gandhi, like Martin Luther King. There have been many brilliant men in history that have demonstrated you don't need to defend yourself, that truth in itself is the greatest defence. Another amazing man was Wayne Clayton, who was an Australian, who was a very funny man. He just considered himself an ordinary bloke who stands for love. And so he was spreading the message of love. And he was very blokey, very football-like guy. And he got a caravan and he decided to hitch across Australia without a car. And so he would get someone to pick him up with his caravan, hook it on the back of the car. He'd pay for petrol, and they would take him a distance. They might unhook him and then he hitch another ride. It was so successful. He got a lot of media attention, because how many people, let's face it, are going to travel across Australia with a caravan? He also did it across the States. A really amazing guy. So that's just a small sample of the 135 radio programs that I did, where I was exposed to a divergent view of a range of people who had actually looked at peace from different angles. It was extremely interesting and developed my understanding of peace on another level there. So that's really developing listening as a peace skill. Then I got involved in what I call proactivism, where as a clown I started to go to rallies, and I saw myself as the jester who de-escalates any conflict at those rallies, because I'm facilitating that democratic right to protest, because protest is not anti-anything. Protest is the voice of the people coming together around issues that they consider important. It's not anti-establishment. Yet sometimes people can feel quite nervous in doing that because the government might react. We see in some countries violent reactions to the voice of the people. This is where democracy is challenging that national order, that authority. So as a clown, I went to protests and livened it up, tried to create more fun. I did explore some protests that were quite atomised, that were very targeted. I know there was one in respect of an Australian that was being held at Guantanamo Bay. His name was Hicks. And I did attempt to bring the jester into that, but it was such a small protest that it was actually not really working. And I had to be very sensitive to the people because they were very angry at that time. And the thing with the clown is to try and distract them from some of the anger. Although in this particular protest, these people needed to express what they expressed, so it wasn't really the right space for it. I also went into the centre of Melbourne and I created 2 big boards, and I got people to fill out on little post-it notes their ideas for peace. One was to go to these were cards, so they were to go to the United Nations, one was, and the other one was to go to the Maribyrnong Detention Centre. And I luckily had the opportunity to go and clown with the refugees that were being held in a maximum security jail here in Melbourne. Normally you can't get in, but as a clown I was able to. And I was able to hug the people, talk to the refugees, and also connect with the guards and International Red Cross that were there. It was an experience that brought joy to the people who were there, but it also raised my awareness of how they were being imprisoned when they were innocent people escaping persecution. A jail is not the appropriate place to house any refugee. They shouldn't be contained. If we're going to process them, we need to do it very fast and to adhere to the 1951 Refugee Convention. Or it is an obligation on humanity to look after those refugees whose flows have been created by wars that have been largely, particularly in the last, say, 20 years, been about oil, not democracy. And sometimes people don't want to accept that reality, but it has been about oil. So those countries who are engaged in those conflicts do have a responsibility to ensure that those who have left that conflict are well looked after and are not risking their lives on boat trips. I also met a lot of refugees. I've interviewed them. I understand the humanitarian angle of people being displaced, stateless. The way that they're treated when people believe they have no power, they then lose all rights. It's not dissimilar to the people who are in prison are also denied rights. Whereas from a peacemaking perspective, we would accord human rights to everybody. Everyone has the right to be treated with dignity and to be held in conditions that are habitable, that are humane, and to not be affected by torture or abuse of any kind. A good governance will ensure an adherence to the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the various protocols, international protocols on civil and political rights, cultural and social rights. As signatories to international treaties, governments have to be held to account to adhere to these international standards. Otherwise, it creates more chaos in the world as we end up in that state of nature that's very, what we would call Hobbesian in philosophy, where it's the world of tooth and claw. We don't want that. We want to ensure that international law is adhered to and enforced. So the proactivism also included letter writing. I had the FBI come to my website when I published Major Douglas Roque and Scott Ritter. So as a peace person, we typically do get watched by intelligence agencies. Certainly when I was on the Rotary Peace and Conflict Studies program, there was intelligence interest in who the peacemakers are, because often they're perceived as in conflict with those regimes. It's very important that we create a narrative that peace is actually about true peace. It's about bringing these warring parties together. It's not anti-anything, it's pro-positive internationalism, where we learn how to cooperate and we apply peace philosophies in order to de-escalate violence to ensure well-being and environmental sustainability. So I did write to the FBI, told them what I do as part of my own dialogue with them. They didn't write back, but one will hope in the future we will have a world order where we are responsive to one another and that we learn from differences. I've also been a clown at Aucare's Refugee Week. I actually formulated a Afghan bazaar in order to create a warm relationship between the Australian people and Afghans. At that time, there was a drought in Afghanistan and many people were dying. So I created a bazaar in liaison with Aucare, which is an Australian charity. I read poetry with an Afghan who had painted paintings. We had tabla and sitar. We had newsreels of Afghanistan. It's what it looks like, the culture. We had a little bit on politics in respect of a dispute with the Tampa, which was a commercial vessel where refugees had been picked out of the sea. Their boat had collapsed, and there was a dispute about whether they were going to get entry into Australia. So there's lots and lots of issues around at that time around Afghanistan, and the point of this was to celebrate the Afghan identity and to help to educate people about the culture, to help them to feel more at home here, those who were here, and to raise issues of what was going on in Afghanistan. I also advocated for a Department of Peace to some degree. I did try and start a survey and interview people about that and get them to put their names on a petition for a Department of Peace, because what we're doing is we're still funding defence in an old paradigm where we are arming up to defend against, or we are proactively entering alliances which are aggressive and going in under, there could be under the problem of weapons of mass destruction. There could be breaches of international law. Typically it's weapons programs, but we do have issues of regime change being actioned. There needs to be more international discussion around the legality and illegality of wars. So the Department of Peace is an initiative to actually set one up within governments so that we can start to peace build around the world. We can start to roll out conflict resolution rather than surveillance states, so that we're solving problems. We're not accelerating problems through creating distrust, through control paradigms, through punitive punishment, through arbitrary arrest, through human rights violations. Instead, we are creating cultures of peace within societies where there are standards, where there are adherence to universal values that globally we all share. And a Department of Peace could roll out these initiatives, and people could be acknowledged for the peace building. I did actually create a Speak Up Award, which was a Sustainability Peace Encouragement Award for kids to unite people, and I did take it to Rotary. I have taken it to many organisations, and the idea was to travel the world as a world peace clown and to invite young people to submit ideas on peace building and sustainability over 1 year. And those ideas would have been filtered through Rotaract, the young people involved in Rotary, and then channelled up to a Rotary International level, which had peacemakers on the committee. And the best ideas could have been presented to the United Nations. Rotary has a seat on the UN. So it was an idea that really could have taken off. But unfortunately, what's difficult, when you're a solo peacemaker and you're not with any organisation, it's very difficult to get traction around really good ideas if you're not known. And Rotary, like any other organisation, typically would look at who those organisations are and their affiliations. Many Rotarians come from business backgrounds, so there's a certain process that they go through. For those of us who are not part of that, in respect of being peacemakers as a vocation, we may not know how to engage with their expectations, and we may not know how to network, given that we're quite different. The peacemakers are thinking in different ways. So there was lots and lots of initiatives I did as proactivism, as a clown, raising awareness in society about peace. As I said, the Rotary Peace and Conflict Studies program was a great leap forward for me in respect of being chosen from a worldwide candidacy. I was probably the first clown selected. And what that experience gave me was both the practical and the theoretical. So the Chulalongkorn University program of Peace Fellows was a short program, but it had professional conflict resolvers on it, lawyers were on it, human rights advocates were on it. We had mullahs, we had psychologists, people from all walks of life were involved in that program. And it really took us into learning how to resolve conflicts. So we had all the greatest scholars and teachers of peace from all the Rotary centres around the world come to Bangkok in Thailand and teach us. And then we got the opportunity to go to disputes like the Salween River Dam dispute. We got to learn about the Carew up in the Burmese forests that were being shot at, and they were fleeing across the Thai border, and they were being placed in camps. I had the opportunity to clown at Malay camp with a Sri Lankan doctor who was on the course. And the two of us moved through a 50,000 refugee camp and spread love. I was juggling, so we were getting people to laugh. We were teaching the children mime. An American came with me who was really great theatrical person. So her and I did mime, with the kids. And for the first time, they got to experience what a clown was. It was a really powerful way of experiencing the people and trialing clowning as a peace-building method. I also had the opportunity in Bangkok to meet with a woman called Dr. Pat Anatol, who was a doctor in the hospital, Chulalongkorn Hospital, and I taught a course on Patch Adams to some staff. This was nursing staff and doctors and psychologists. And then I got the nursing staff and others dressed up, and we went into one of the, I think it was outpatients where we went, and they had the opportunity to experience Patch Adams type exposure to clowning and how that can actually have a health effect on patients. It's also very good for staff because they get to play and it bonds the team. It has very great therapeutic qualities. I also created a project with other Rotary Peace Fellows where we created a peace education program and we trialled it at the American School of Bangkok. I brought in my Real Hope area. Other scholars brought in their experiences of peace education, and we had the opportunity to spend, a day with these young people, and then they had the opportunity to talk and give feedback to Rotary, how this had impacted them. The project was extremely powerful and effective, and that's another possibility that could have been expanded throughout the world, but unfortunately we didn't really get the traction that we needed in order to roll out the peace program. But it was certainly a demonstration of what Peace Fellows can do when they're brought together. We also, did field trips. We went to Rayong down in southern Thailand and we met with prostitutes. We met with a priest at the Chameleon Centre he was Giovanni, his name was Giovanni. He was a priest, Father Giovanni. And he was the one that had set up a 40-bed facility as a hospital for women dying of HIV. There were also children with HIV there. So again, myself and the Sri Lankan doctor, we also did some clowning to bring some joy and also to demonstrate you could touch people who had HIV. That was very important. I also clowned in the slum in Cambodia. It's called Andong Slum. We first went there as Rotary Peace Fellows to investigate this slum, which had housed in makeshift dwellings people who had been removed from the centre of Phnom Penh as redevelopments were happening within the prime real estate in the centre of Phnom Penh. So these people were moved 25 k's out into Andong Slum. Some people were also working at a Target factory, and we went to investigate the factory and noticed the lines and lines and lines of women working on garments for, I think, probably $1 a day. In Andong Slum, I felt inspired to come back to that slum as a clown, which I did with the Sri Lankan doctor. And the two of us, he got onto the drums. I twirled my ribbon, I juggled, I brought out my puppets, and we did a performance for a makeshift school that an Australian had actually created. That was Lee Matthews. I think she got Australian of the Year. I met Lee, and Lee was the one that arranged for us to go out to the school that she had built. She was only 21 when she did all this. She was a remarkable young woman. And we sort of marched through the slum. We met the parents, threw fluffy balls, and everyone was laughing. It was wonderful. So Rotary Peace and Conflict Studies program was a fantastic opportunity to firstly learn from experts around the world, but to also experientially apply conflict mapping, work out the tensions in disputation, to actually physically go to places and meet with the people involved in disputes, to go to the killing fields and see the outcome of totalitarianism, the outcome of ideologies which penalise people who don't adhere to those ideologies. We went to Torsalong prison where people were tortured in respect of Pol Pot. These were the enemies of the state, which were grandparents, parents, children. We saw all their photos. We saw the torture mechanisms. So this awakened us to what goes wrong when we don't resolve disputes. And this is why I'm so committed to peace. Out of all of this, I did continue with the peace work, and I created World Peaceful, which you can go to my website, www.worldpeaceful.com, and that's FULL.com. So World Peaceful is about awakening the full to a world peaceful. I envisage workshops in business, anti-bullying, workplace bullying, emotional intelligence, awareness, assertiveness training, values-based training, conflict resolution, well-being, clowning around so people can release tension was what I envisaged as part of World Peaceful. The other part, of course, was the Peace, Real Hope programs in school and peace building in schools. I wasn't able to fully action this work because I didn't have the funding, and trying to do it independently was very, very challenging. You need good investment behind you. You can go to my schools program on the World Peaceful website, and if you go to anti-bullying, you can look at the video on the Real Hope program. It will give you an insight into why this is so important. So World Peaceful was my vision for a world fit for children, values-based education, bringing humour and joy into children's lives has been my true mission. From World Peaceful, I was inspired to travel the world as a world peace clown, which I did. I travelled to 20 countries and I clowned on the streets, and I brought my hosts onto the street with me. I produced a journal, which was Peace is Our True Nature, which you're welcome to have a look at. I wrote that journal over 9 years as I started to expand out from my world trip into exploring questions of politics, of power, of poetry in service of solving problems. I had many, many videos on solutions to peace in there. I also was expressing myself, so I was practicing freedom of speech, which is absolutely essential for peace. I tackled every subject and I gave my view on every subject. I also put information out in the public interest. So this was community journalism. This was a voice. This was a true democratic expression to demonstrate peace in action. My work got noticed by government and by those in the intelligence community as well, because I was also questioning intelligence work, because it had been brought to my attention that there had been illegality in there. Certainly Scott Ritter had also made very clear through being a whistleblower that there had been agendas at play within government. So as peacemakers, we do get attention because we raise issues that many people are probably afraid to raise in the public interest. So matters of speaking truth to power are very important when you're a peacemaker, because it's actually in service to that person in power or those people in power that someone speaks up. But from the peace perspective, we do it without aggression. I'm very mindful of conflict resolution. I'm very mindful of not demonising the other party. So this was a practice over 9 years of communicating about some of the most important issues and bringing into the blog other voices that were whistleblowing, other voices that were experts in the field, other voices that were providing diverse perspectives and expanding on peace in lots of ways. I also, through this book that you will see appended to the video, A Fall for Peace, I also developed holistic economics. Being an analyst myself and having trained in economics, I have developed a holistic vision of a new paradigm. In fact, moving from the economic paradigm to gross national happiness has to be the outcome, because gross domestic product is exponential growth, where we're constantly producing more and more things. And as our world community expands in respect of business, more resources are being extracted and processed. There's more competition. There's greater poverty because money becomes the power and people can accumulate a lot. So, for example, less than 1% have up to 50% of the wealth on the planet. That's a gross distortion in respect of what we really want an economic system is to create happiness. That was why economics was first invented. Keynesian economics was to have a form of government oversight to ensure balance within a society and to share the wealth so that we have more stability. But when we get extremes in respect of power, those who have accumulated way too much and those masses who are getting larger, because we're seeing the middle class move into the lower socioeconomic area, so they're becoming poorer. And with that there becomes greater tensions. People are more disgruntled. They lose hope. They go into despair. There's greater mental health issues. So this imbalance is what takes us away from peace. And as I stated in the very beginning of this video, peace actually means balance. So the peacemakers have to be supported in having a voice in order to educate the world community that it's not in their interest to create these extremes. And even those at the very top, they too are disconnecting from their greatness in respect of what they can do to actually equalise the the incomes and to redistribute the resources more fairly. And we also need to adopt peace as a philosophy, and certainly real hopes as a guidance or a blueprint, in order to bring us back into balance and homeostasis with the ecological system, which is collapsing. Our internal imbalance is what has created the external imbalance. The Sustainable Development Goals, whilst they're very noble, they haven't addressed peace in respect of balance. We cannot create cities based on IT because it develops distrust. If we've got cameras every 50 metres recording people, there are real issues globally around how people might feel about their data being gathered. Is that going to bombard them with advertisements? Is that still going to further amplify economic activity, which might accelerate the breakdown of the environmental system? With the ice caps melting, we've got real issues of the poles flipping. We've got issues of droughts occurring in areas where they hadn't occurred. We've got sea level rises. So great numbers of people could be inundated with flooding. How does the axis shift when we extract oil, this very heavy weight that is transformed from liquid to gas? How does that affect the balance of the planet? There are many, many, many iterations that occur when we're out of balance. When we play with the genetic modification of the planet, which has been built up over 4 billion years, 6 billion years, actually 4 billion years. We are doing it from an economic perspective in respect of growing markets, but that's out of alignment with a natural system which is very much interconnected, and it's very much adapting on the basis of slight changes. As things change, every organism adapts. Adaptation is that balance. Now, if we are modifying things in order to produce more output, which gives us more income, and we call that balance, it's a mistake that we've made. It doesn't create balance. It actually extracts more, and it disrupts the natural system. We are part of nature, so it actually disrupts us. So the real disruptions are coming from our imbalance with the natural world. And the only way we can overcome that imbalance is to really anchor and understand peace as our true nature. When you're at peace, you don't need things. Now, from those involved in economic growth, they would not want that type of philosophy because they see loss in that. But what's very important for them to understand is that we're creative and we can manifest many adventures, many different ways of doing things if we can open our mind to seeing life in a different way. If we're all looking after each other, that loss need not happen. It just means we redirect that incredible talent in another direction that really builds peace. So I think there's many, many things I've done in addition to, recrafting peace. I've travelled the world to many places. I've travelled Australia, I've travelled to India, and I also travelled to Nepal. I was also involved in the Rotary conference in Hawaii, where I met wonderful speakers. I've explored the spiritual dimension to peace, and in my book you can have a look in there to have a look at the various ways we can understand peace from ancient eyes. And so I might finish this off now because it's been a very long discussion, but my work is very involved and it does require the time to really deeply understand what I've discovered. I believe I am pioneering another way. My vision is to awaken the fool to a world peaceful. I believe we need to establish real hopes in schools all over the world. We need to learn to laugh. We must ensure a culture of peace does develop around the world, if we're to ensure that we don't see massive collapse in a sixth mass extinction event. Because as we change, the world changes. We are nature, and don't underestimate the power of change in the human condition. So with that, I'm going to thank you for listening to my story. It's been really wonderful to share it. This is the first time I've actually gone through my entire work and shared it with Rotary in this way. I am a peacemaker. I dreamed I was teaching peace, and that's precisely what I've been doing for the last 20 years. I'm unpaid. I even live without a home, and I live without income. I have found a joy within myself which is indescribable. I am experiencing more and more feelings of true peace. I have my moments like everyone else, but I believe through this hard work, through this endless exploration of peace, that I have truly found answers that I believe will create, will inspire the next step of our evolution, which is to awaken to the true nature of who we are, which is peace. I call myself a peaceful, and I hope you will join me to awaken the full. You are invited to contact me. Come to my website, www.worldpeaceful.com. You're welcome to also visit Happiness Australia, ha.worldpeaceful.com. If you want to have a look at the workplace bullying, go to biz.worldpeaceful.com. And I very much look forward to expanding this work, which we are at the very beginning. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I send you much love. I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.